Welcome to Slight Reliability, learning SRE one day at a time. I'm Stephen Townsend. Welcome back to Slight Reliability. I'm Stephen Townsend, and this is the show where we learn SRE one day at a time. Today I'll be sharing an interview I did with Abby Bangser about how she transitioned from a QA role into SRE and a lot more. So here's the interview, and I'll chat to you afterwards. I guess to kick things off, I was wondering if you could introduce yourself and give us a bit of an overview of your career.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I have had the title SRE for about a 2-year stint, but currently I am a principal engineer at a startup trying to build tools to support platform engineers and their developer experience. So you think a lot about software developer experience, but when you're doing that, how do the people who are building those platforms and those experiences build them for you? So that's what we're doing. It's been a bit of a road getting towards these types of jobs and titles. I was at ThoughtWorks as a consultant for about 7 years, and that was when I had a specialty in quality and testing, and that evolved into focus on things like DevOps and delivering quality to production, which is what led me into becoming a platform engineer for a couple of years at a small company, medium-sized company in London, and then into becoming an SRE, and now where I am today.
Well, what does it mean what is platform engineer experience? Like, what are the aspects that you were working on to improve?
When you think about DevX, and you think about so developer experience being DevX, or you think about DevOps being development and operations, there's been so much work in the Agile community to try and bring development and operations of software together into one. So the team is in charge of building the software and operating the software. And this move towards realizing platform engineering as a need. And by platform engineering, I mean the packaging of access to infrastructure in a way that your whole organization can benefit from. There's been a bit of pushback saying, well, isn't that just separating again development and operations? Like if all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of people who are in charge of the databases and then other people that are in charge of the software using the databases, isn't that just another kind of over the wall throw? And what we really advocate for is that there is development and operations of different layers of the stack, and that a single team should own both the creation or the development and the operations or the long-term maintenance of their software, of what they're building. But that doesn't mean that they have to own the development and operations of every piece of infrastructure down the stack. So, for example, it would be a bit crazy to ask a software engineering team today to manage the power supply to their servers. Like, no, that's why you pay for public cloud. But in some ways, when asking a software team to own the creation of and the maintenance of and the upgrades of their database servers, that's almost a similarly kind of crazy idea in some ways. Why are we asking 10 or 100 different software teams at our organizations to each do that when we could customize that and build backups and upgrades and rolling out of new features into a team that actually owns that experience of working with databases at the organization? And so as a engineer at Syntasso, as we build out Cradix, which is the name of the framework, what we're thinking about is what is the experience of these engineers who have users, just their users or internal software engineers, and have long-term maintenance of their product, which is like the software engineers will use databases for years to come. So how do you give them monitoring of those databases and access to optimize them and visibility into them and those kinds of things? So how do we support those platform engineers in building their product, which is just the same as any other product, just aimed at internal people? And that's what I mean by kind of developer experience for platform engineers.
I guess platform engineering or platform engineer as a role has some, in my mind, potential crossover with SRE, because I think different companies have a completely different perception or definition of what SRE actually means to them. So here's my question is for you, what does SRE mean to you? Because it means different things to different people.
Ironically, that is very accurate to my experience of when I actually held the title of SRE. Is my experience of being an SRE was pretty much a platform engineer plus plus, but that didn't really align with my hopes for what I thought that role could bring and that role had the potential to be, nor would I kind of hear some people speaking about. But as you say, it's a little bit different everywhere. So to me, SRE is all about the reliability of your system. But when thinking about reliability, for me, that means being able to define what reliability means to you and to your users. So there's going to be times when you have to do trade-offs of what the business cares about and what the user's experiencing and maybe are unhappy about, but you have to kind of balance those needs. So for example, if you need to do load shedding because you have too many requests coming in, there may be things that your business says we have to serve this traffic 100% or close to 100% of the time, as much as we can, even if that might just inconvenience some of our users. So understanding those trade-offs and understanding what reliability means to the business and to the users is a huge part of it. And so, yeah, deeply understanding those business cases. And I don't know, for me, coming from a testing background, I think it's acknowledging and realizing that edge cases are cases. So really having that idea of that if it happens 1 in a million, well, if you're at a certain scale, that's actually happening quite frequently. And so that turn of phrase is actually in itself quite entertaining. So so that's what I really think about is what is going to be happening as you serve to your customers. What are they going to be experiencing and how are you going to make sure their experience is as much what they're hoping for as possible, as well as providing for your business what they're asking for. And in practice, I see that playing out in very different ways. Some people will call themselves SREs and be very kind of niche technically. They'll be very good at optimizing a very narrow stack of technology. And that in itself is quite helpful, depending on what the company's doing. But then I'll see all the way through to kind of more broadly applicable kind of coaching and exploration and definition of service level objectives and things like that. So I think I probably fall closer to that end of the spectrum. And that wasn't what I, kind of experienced. It was the need of my company at the time, which was a bit of a misalignment there.
What made you want to transition from that testing world to SRE? It sounds almost like it was almost a natural progression because you were already looking at quality in production.
I think if I had to summarize, it was probably having less barriers to entry. I felt like the title brought with it access to meetings and information and tools that I wanted access to. But that was only because I was aware of what I wanted access to, which I think speaks to that progression you're speaking about, which you mentioned. Because I did go on a huge progression through my QA experience. I started with automation testing, and then I realized it's cool to automate testing, but if no one knows what good looks like, you're just automating what exists. That doesn't mean you're actually building the thing that you're supposed to be building. So got into a lot of more analysis and understanding the systems and what we want to do there. And then I started realizing, started to be exposed to, this isn't new information. I'm not some brilliant, crazy person way out in the forward. This is just being exposed to the fact that no matter how good this looks on your machine, when it gets to production, it's different configuration, it's different, regions of the world, it's different all sorts of things, and how that is actually what matters. No one cares if it looks good on a tester's computer. They care if they are able to use the website well. And so I started getting really into how we build quality in as you deploy out to production, and as well as how do you understand what quality is in production? How do you understand what an experience is for a user there? And that progressed me into kind of that space and really getting into monitoring and observability techniques. And that was where I started seeing a lot of barriers. I started seeing, as a tester, I would be asking questions about day 1, day 2 operations, so things that were after deployment. And I would be getting some brick walls around permissions to get to tools, or just a little bit of uneasiness as to why I might be asking these questions. And hey, get your nose out of there. That's not where you're supposed to be. And so I sort of saw my jaunt into platform engineering and SRE as a way to dip a toe past the line gather a whole bunch of intel and then come on back to testing and pass it all back to, open those doors, those floodgates for everyone. And, I'm still on, I guess I'm still on that recon mission, but I'm trying to pass information back where I can. So
yeah, I had a very similar experience in performance testing. I felt like I was expected or relegated to running load tests, although that was the least valuable thing that I thought I could be doing. I wanted to be working in production and more in the observability space. And once again, the SRE role, for whatever it is, the role itself has opened up doorways. So I agree with you on that. If there was someone who's in a testing or quality role, and maybe they haven't at all really worked in that production world before in operations, what sort of advice would you give them in terms of how could they prepare themselves or make themselves get the right experience so that they could be hired or moved into an SRE type role?
Oh, it's going to be we go back to that definition of SRE and how it's so different in different organizations. So I can't get the 7 years of consultancy out of me. It depends. I'm sorry for everyone that hates consultants for that reason. But no, there are some things I think. So I think maybe the most concrete thing that I would argue is maybe across the board helpful is getting involved in what looks like incident management and incident awareness. I think it is very rare that I know of people in the SRE space that are not engaged in incident handling, whether or not the SREs own that at an organization or just a part of it. And so understanding what incident management means. So what happens when something goes wrong? When you realize that a deployment has gone badly or that users are having a bad experience, how does your organization handle it? How does that work well? And how doesn't that work well? How is information captured and shared as needed? And how do you learn from those incidents so that you can improve response time and what you build in the future? These are all kind of techniques around incident management and reliability engineering that I think are really important to engage in. So that would be, I think, probably the most important skill associated with it, becoming an incident manager. Otherwise, I think it's actually really related to just being a QA, but opening your breadth of focus. So rather than just focusing on how do you get this software signed off by a product owner, think about the impacts of what you're building. Think about what I mentioned or alluded to as day one and day two operations. So how is this thing going to go live? How are you going to accept user traffic onto this new way of doing things? Maybe you're changing how something is done. Well, how do you phase out the old way and introduce the new way? Like, what happens if the new way breaks and you have to go back to the old way? Is that possible? These are the kinds of questions that you should be maybe asking about that would talk about rollout plans. And day two, like thinking about, what happens if this is popular? Will this sustain 10 times growth, 100 times growth? Is that even viable or something that you want to be thinking about right now as an organization? I think those kinds of questions all of a sudden are still very within the realm of quality. They just tackle it from a slightly different angle. And I think having conversations with operations people where that's their bread and butter, you'll pick up a lot of lingo and all of a sudden it'll feel a lot less scary because you'll start to understand the words that people are using. And it really is the same thing. It's asking hard questions of like, what happens if? Like, let's come up with a scenario and see how our software would respond to that. I found I did that a lot as a QA as well. And I do that a lot now in my role.
Do you think maybe there's a bit of a catch-22 between if you're in a role which has the title testing or QA in it and you want to get involved in incident management, which you mentioned before, but you're kind of excluded from that because that's the thing, that's for the ops team to deal with or the tech leads to deal with. Do you think there's barriers there or?
I'm supposed to say no, that's the party line, right? But honestly, that's part of why I explained why I got into SRE, right? It sort of depends on your organization, sort of depends on your team. I found that it was about finding the right people. There's certain people that will always be more open to it. From my side as a tester, being humble and being acknowledging of the fact that you have a lot to learn and that testing isn't perfect and that you're not coming in because you're going to catch people doing the wrong thing and that your job is to tell people where they went wrong, which is sometimes the perception of a tester. And And as a human, you might have that instinct to want to be finding where other people have gone wrong, like, and quite defensive about how much value you bring. Kind of trying to put that to the side, being a bit humble about it, and then finding people who will let you in the door. So my first platform engineering official job was after ThoughtWorks. I had a manager who talked to me about joining a platform engineering team with the title QA. And I said, I don't know. Like, I've seen that brick wall and I don't really want to face it again. And I realized that maybe I can't, get as high pay with a different title yet because I haven't proven myself, but I think I need to worry about title right now. The manager was like, no, trust me. The team you're going to be on isn't going to care what your title is. They're going to give you opportunities if you want them. Like, but you can't, you're right. If I bring you in, I'm happy to bring you in as a platform engineer, but your pay will get cut. But below where I think your skills deserve. So I can advocate for the right salary for you under the title QA. But under platform engineer, given your CV, I won't be able to. And so I took them at their word and I joined the team, and it was an amazing experience where they were 100% right that the team never kind of held me back or said no because of my title. But I had to kind of take a leap of faith and find the right people to pull me into that. And so I think that's really important, is finding the people that are open to that crossover of skills.
I kind of want to ask something along the lines of, like, is there a particular kind of QA or tester who's quite suited to this kind of work, or is there like a particular reason, like a good reason for someone to want to make that shift or not?
In thinking about what type of QAs may lend themselves well to SRE or may be interested in this as a career path, there's QAs who I think have a lot of potential to become fantastic product owners. And there's QAs who have a lot of potential to be fantastic software engineers. And QA can be a jumping off point for both high level QA roles as well as, a plethora of other ideas. For SRE, if that's a direction that you're interested in, I think that it is important to have that automation mindset. So that mindset that you are one human who can only do so much, and you value reducing the amount of load on humans by automating things away, right? So one of the definitions from Google about SRE is it's taking software engineering and applying it to operations problems. What they mean by that is taking automation and writing software, but putting that around things like database creation and other scaling, auto scaling and things like that. So I think you definitely have to have an interest in automation and an interest in leveraging automation and believing that automation has value. But there is something about risk management that's super important as well in my experience. So it's every line of code is dangerous. It's coming to get you. It's going to make a mistake at some point. And you don't, while it is applying software engineering to operations, it's acknowledging that the best software engineers don't want to write code. They try and solve problems with the least amount of code, the least amount of complexity, because they know that the most expensive part about software engineering is the maintenance of it. So I think there's pragmatism there that needs to be put into place, and kind of just asking, like, what's the simplest way of getting this done? What's the right way? And how do I validate as quickly as possible? How do I validate things as quickly as possible? So one trait I see sometimes in testers is they want to test everything they can. And it's, one of those sayings of, like, just because you can doesn't mean you should kind of idea. And really thinking through, like, why are you writing both a unit test and a UI test associated with that? Like, what value are you getting from that UI test, which takes a lot more time to write and to run and to debug? When you have a unit test, is there something you are getting in addition? Same thing goes for, like, why are you writing any tests if you can run some automated flows through in production's canaries? Now, I ask that, and people are going to be throwing their hands up and saying, "Oh, like, see, people don't like testing anymore." And I believe you will. If you ask yourself that question, there will be good reason why you will write automated tests before you canary in production. But you should be able to answer it. And you shouldn't get your back up and be frustrated that someone challenged you with that idea, because you should be like, that's a great idea. That will speed everything up. But let's think through, what are the consequences? And how do we balance those two things at the right level so we get value and speed. And I think those are some things that will lend well to QAs that want to go to SRE.
When I think of SRE, I think of like big multinational companies and massive scale. But you worked as an SRE in a quite a small startup type organization. So how do you think that SRE work might be different in a small organization versus a very large one?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I can only speak from like one use case, so I can't say everywhere. But in my experience, it actually tracks quite similarly to any other role in a small org versus a big org. In a big organization, you specialize a lot more because you have people who can cover all of the sides that you aren't. So there are pros and cons to that, because as you specialize, you narrow your scope of awareness, which means that you may not realize all the things that go into it and all the bits around you, but you get very, very good at that optimized skill. At the smaller organizations, you're often pulled in a million different directions. You'll find yourself as part-time barista and part-time operations specialist and part-time customer service and all the things, right? But it means that you understand how those bits work together. And so context switching is quite difficult, but it's quite powerful to be able to learn those different contexts. So my experience at the small organization is that, in my opinion, I was not doing the side of SRE I was most excited about. I found that having conversations about what is our service level objective when we have a handful of customers is not as impactful as talking about how to get databases as like more maintainable by engineers, or how to create self-service for people, or how to encourage software engineers to be able to load test their own software when like they're doing, or performance test, a database query. How do they do that? These are things that are really impactful at the scale we're at, more so than the idea that you can be monitoring hundreds of thousands of millions of customers. So we did do a lot of really interesting things that I would have put more squarely in my target as being an SRE. So for example, we did, calculations of what kind of scale of organization can we get to with our current architecture? Where will we start to see cracks showing? And you never really know till you know, but you can at least try. You can at least identify known breaking points that you can try and head off, so that any of the unknowns you have space to handle, because you are actively iterating on becoming able to support larger workloads, larger customer bases, and so on. But yeah, I just basically wear a lot of hats when you're in a small organization. So you're part infrastructure engineer, part platform engineer, part SRE. So yeah.
It's really good to hear what you did, because I've been banging on about it's all about taking what's going to be most useful in your unique context, right? As opposed to just reading the Google book and trying to copy it. It doesn't make any sense. So
absolutely.
I really like what you said there. So sort of more generally, are there any people, books, podcasts, blogs, anything at all which has sort of inspired you in your career or helped you learn and grow?
So many. I think so. When I was thinking about this, I think of the people that opened doors for me. So there's lots of people I've learned from every single day, but there's people who really changed my trajectory and changed the way I thought about things. So I had the distinct pleasure to work with Keith Morris when he was in the middle of writing the first Infrastructure as Code book, first edition of that book. And he was one of the first people I met and worked with that really brought testing and product mindset and like a belief that infrastructure is something that, deserves the same care and attention and evolution as software. And that really reinforced a feeling that I think was growing in me on the different teams I was in, but really kind of validated it and showed me that it was possible as well. Because he was writing the book and explaining, techniques you could use. And that really kind of gave me energy to follow that through. So I think, he's someone that I definitely look up to and learn a lot from, as well as all the people I've been on teams with him on. And then it was, I think I was really getting into the observability space. So I'd gotten into infrastructure and realized how hard automated testing is, and even manual testing in infrastructure. And I was like, how do you validate this stuff? And it's all of a sudden you start learning about this idea of testing in production and chaos engineering and how to kind of validate infrastructure in a way through canaries and things like that. And I remember having a conversation where I kind of tracked charity majors down at a conference in London and was like, can I buy you a drink? And having a chat with Charity, who's one of the founders of Honeycomb, which is an observability tool, and having a chat with her and having her really respect testers. Coming from an ops background, it's quite more common to have people be like, oh, testers. And instead, her reaction was, testing is so important and such a highly valued skill, but I've just noticed over my career that there's these two tracks of the testers that are super high value and engaged with the process. And then there's all this community that is just kind of being left behind. And I don't know what to do with it. And I don't want to see operations and observability go that direction. And so she managed to like speak about exactly what I was seeing and acknowledge that there's so much potential there, but also so much risk there that people are holding on to the past, and that she was going through very similar things in the operations space. So again, it was sort of like giving me a light to follow and way to think about things as I was entering this operations space for the first time. So yeah, she's someone that I definitely have learned a lot from as well.
Similar experiences in performance testing. There seemed to be a growing, a large part of the community who were sort of fixed on running load tests, and that was all they really needed to worry about. And for me, that was just less and less of the value. It's tricky.
And it's how do you keep that stuff though? Like you say, it's less and less of the value, but it's not. There's a reason it's important. It's just that if you narrow in on this is the only thing that is important because this is the thing I'm specialty in. Yeah. Like that's where the challenge is. It's knowing where to apply it, when to apply it, and like, yeah, I think that's the challenge. Knowing when and where to apply it rather than just assuming it's a hammer and everything is a nail.
And how to supplement that with other things, which maybe, like you were saying before, the canarying idea, exactly this, yeah. Maybe we don't need to performance test this particular thing. We can just go live to a subset of users and find out, cover most of the risk. All right, I'm going to finish off with a really silly question, as I always do. Would you rather have super speed or super strength as a superpower?
Ooh, super speed or super strength. Still kind of running speed, is that right? It'd still be like human-oriented level of speed. Is that right?
As
like it wouldn't get me like across oceans, right? Like it's still like running on land kind of speed.
But maybe you can run on land on the water so quickly that you're just moving so fast, like one of those beetles or something, and you create pockets of air and you can go. I don't know.
I do love travel. I think I have to pick super speed because getting from place to place is, I think that's gotta be my favorite.
Thank you so much, Abby, for the awesome interview. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of it. I know there are many people in the quality engineering space which are thinking about SRE as a career choice, and it's just really nice to hear your journey and how you got there. That's all for another episode of Slight Reliability. I'll be back next week with some more. Thank you once again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.